Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy Friday, or Saturday, or Sunday, or Monday. I don't know what day you're listening to this, but whatever day it is, hope it's a great day for you. Quick note before we get started for today's show, I want to tell you about the growth we've been seeing with this show and with Lions of Liberty Pride. We're having some of the best download numbers we've ever had, and that is all thanks to you guys, thanks to our new listeners from our advertising on the Reason Roundtable, and the growth we've seen in the Lions of Liberty Pride, which you can join by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. We are now over our goal of $1,500 per month, which gets us to really doing the Libertarian National Convention the right way, getting a videographer there to document everything, put out great content, interviews, video, all that stuff for you guys to enjoy. So we're not stopping here. We want to keep going. The next goal is $2,000 a month. So please help us to get there. You can do that by joining us for as little as $5 per month. Actually, as little as $2 per month. You can get access to our Facebook group. If you want bonus content and all that good stuff, you got to give us at least $5 per month to get that. And it is so worth it. So please join us at the Lions of Liberty Pride, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty.
Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, welcome back to another edition of Felony Friday, a weekly show right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. What is Felony Friday? Felony Friday is a show where every single week we're going to do a deep dive and we're going to examine and expose injustice in the broken criminal justice system. Now, if this is your first time listening to Felony Friday, your first time listening to any of the shows we have here on Lions of Liberty, sit back, relax, enjoy the show, put your feet up. If you're driving, please don't put your feet up. But if you've been back several times, if this is a regular habit of listening, why haven't you subscribed? Or maybe you have subscribed. Thank you if you subscribed. But if you haven't, please do so. Whatever podcasting app you're listening on, please just scroll up to the top there, punch that subscribe button, and you'll get every single episode of the Lions of Liberty podcast and of Felony Friday delivered to your little listening device. And also, if you really enjoy what you're hearing here, please think about giving us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcast, especially if you listen there, because it helps with the algorithms and all that crazy stuff. Without further ado, let's get rolling with today's show. My guest today on Felony Friday is Nick Stein. Nick is here to share his story about how he ended up with 2 marijuana convictions, a misdemeanor for possession, and a felony for intent to distribute. And Nick's story is going to be a little bit different than some of the other stories we've talked about here. He did not serve a significant, or I should say a long prison sentence. Any time in prison or in jail is significant. But he's also here to talk about, and we're going to hit on some activism that he's doing up in Connecticut to try to get recreational marijuana legalized and to work on some expungements up there as well. So, Nick, welcome to Felony Friday.
Thanks for having me, John. And once again, thanks for everything you're doing to bring awareness to the criminal justice system of a lot of the injustices that are happening.
I appreciate that. And you're also someone, as I mentioned in the intro, who's doing the same. And I would guess that your inspiration, your drive comes from your personal experience, some of the things you've had happen to you. So I want to talk about and get through that part of the story, that part of your life, what happened there. But before we do that, just to kind of set it up so people, know more about you as a person and your background, if you could just share a little bit about, what your life was like before you ever had a run-in with the law, before you were ever arrested. What part of the country did you grow up in? What was your upbringing like?
I grew up in a beautiful, rural, very woodsy backwoods town in northeast Connecticut. Called Pomfret, Connecticut. And it's about an hour and a half away from Boston, about 2.5 hours away from New York. So while rural, it's very central to a couple of very urban developed areas.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up there with me, my mom, and my brother for most of my life. My father, unfortunately, passed away when I was very young. So 4 years old, he passed away. And my mom did her very best to raise my brother and I as a single parent. And she did a great job. But, that's obviously very challenging. And she used marijuana throughout my childhood. I'm going to call it a 420 friendly childhood. Not that I used it myself, but just in the same way that alcohol might be around a lot of families in that, the dad has a beer or a cocktail, or mom, that is. But my mom would self-medicate using marijuana, sometimes alcohol too, but marijuana. And it was just something that we kind of knew about in the household. So didn't think much of it at the time, but, in doing a lot of historical self-reflection on my life and with my brother, I think it's something that's pretty unique about our childhood and very significantly impacted, some of the choices that I made with my life later on. So, so my mom did a good job being a single parent and taking care of us. And it was hard for her, but it was really important that she stayed in Pomfret. After losing my dad, it was really hard for her to hold the family together, but she wanted to stay in Pomfret because it had a really good education system. And I'm really thankful that she did do that because the public education was second to none. And because it was so rural, our town actually paid for all of the high school students to go to a private high school. So I got a very good, so it's they still have to follow the rules of a public high school, but about a good portion of the kids who went there were public and but also it was a private high school more than it was a public high school. So
interesting.
And it even had the academy attached to it. Shout out to Woodstock Academy if anyone's listening from Woodstock Academy, so from Woodstock, Connecticut. So so she made some sacrifices. She was a caterer, she was a gardener, she was doing the gig economy before it was cool, and doing whatever it took to get me and my brother through high school and get us into college. So I started using marijuana in high school, mostly just as a social thing. Once again, I witnessed my mom do it, but it's never something that we did together. It was just something that I started doing on my own with my friends because I wanted to be cool, and I thought it was cool. Just
curious, did your mom ever give you that parent speech on marijuana or on drugs or anything like that about?
I don't remember necessarily. I don't remember that conversation. So probably not in an impactful way. Let's put it that way. She did about drinking and driving.
Right.
Definitely gave me that talk. We had the use condoms talk. So it's not for, with your mom, which is awkward, right? But it's not that she didn't care about it. It just, and I agree now, looking back, it would not be on my highest list of concerns as a single parent if I were in her shoes. So I don't think she ever explicitly said no, but maybe relied on some of the DARE and other drug educations that I had at the time. So obviously they didn't work, I'll get into.
So you went off to college and, I think it is worth noting that you did have, it is a unique upbringing in that your mother was using marijuana. It's probably become less unique today as we have, legal recreational marijuana in so many states. It's probably becoming more and more common. Kids growing up in Colorado or in Washington State or all these other states that are legalizing. It's probably becoming just like you said, just like having a beer when you get home from work, having a nice glass of whiskey or something like that. So, when you went into college and you started experimenting and, smoking weed to be cool or just to relax, how did that escalate into the next step? And actually, I assume it escalated into selling it, and that's how you got caught.
Yeah, so I went to state school, University of Connecticut, or the state college rather, which meant that about 2/3 of my friends came with me because a lot of us went to college together. So, I had always been the one who was most, who used marijuana more than most of my other friends. And having lived that life, I was exposed to the black market because it's the only way to procure marijuana. And just by having been given that exposure, I got to know more and more. I'm going to call them drug dealers, but I really only talked to people who sold weed. However, they all had ever increasing amounts of marijuana to offer me if only I could find some other of my friends who were interested in the same thing. So that combined with my generally outgoing and entrepreneurial spirit, it became I realized the economic opportunity for myself to start selling marijuana. We didn't grow up in a rich household. I don't consider myself, other than my mom making all the sacrifices to stay in that private school neighborhood, that's the only bit of white privilege that I'm going to consider myself to ever have been given. Paid my way through school and all of that. But I like the money. So that's pretty much the main reason I started. And you know what? It wasn't so much the money. That did help, but really just having somebody need you for something. Even looking back now, I know that those people didn't really need me, but they were calling me at least once a week, right? I felt popular. And just having people continuously reach out to me and feeling that I was important to people. That was a lot of the reason that I got into selling it. So, and I didn't really feel that bad, because if it had been any other drugs, I was really ingrained. And even if I didn't know the specific science, I could see other drugs have really negative effects on people. But having had personal experience with marijuana and also a lot of friends who use marijuana, I never really saw the negative effects the way that a lot of other drugs. And that's because those negative effects are significantly less bad than alcohol. And that's kind of what our society measures intoxicants against, So I didn't really think I was hurting anyone at the time. Looking back, I realized I hurt myself more than I hurt anybody else. Actually, that's a lie. I hurt my mom more than I hurt anybody else. But that's kind of my reasoning for getting into it. So that was at UConn. I actually have 3 arrests on my record and 2 convictions. So the first one happened within the first month of being at UConn. I went to live on campus, and I was smoking in the dorm room. We use this thing called a spoof, right? So you don't want it to smell. So you'd take a paper towel roll and jam it full of as many dryer sheets as you possibly could. And then you'd inhale the smoke and you'd exhale through the spoof, right? So it would clean.
I've heard of that before. Yeah.
It didn't work. It did not work. It just smelled like really musty. It still smelled like marijuana smoke, just flavored, right? So
flavored with dryer sheets.
Yeah. So I guess it was sort of effective, but not really. So that was in the dorm room, which was a no-go. I ended up leaving and going to class one day. And then within 5 minutes, my roommate came back, who I also smoked with, got paired up with a good one there. And that he ended up getting arrested. So they had smelled the smoke from when I was smoking. And then within a minute of him getting home from class, as I had already left, he actually was the one who got, I'm going to say raided, but so he got arrested, and I ended up getting arrested in that whole deal too. But it was just simple possession. Didn't have a scale. I wasn't really, scale is for, for measuring marijuana. That's kind of what they're looking for really getting you in more trouble. And they didn't pursue my case except for to give me, they gave me misdemeanor, and then they wiped it off as long as I forget what they call it, but basically you get one freebie for low level stuff. So
did that impact you at school at all? I know sometimes on college campuses that can impact your ability to, maybe you get kicked out for a semester or something like that.
Yeah, so I got kicked off campus, which was huge, because I would not have taken my selling marijuana to the level that I did if I was still living on campus. Instead, I got an apartment off campus and then had a pass to drive and park on campus. So I was officially, I could operate however I wanted to operate out of my new apartment where I lived alone at the time, right? So also I lost all my money that I had already put into the housing program, so needed to get some money back. So I guess it kind of drove me to make my part-time more recreational. Let me just hook people up with marijuana, just for them and to make people happy. And instead it became more of a job for me after that. And I really, for the next year after that, I really, I'm going to say I had somebody working for me in every dorm. Not that I was putting them to work, but there was generally an enthusiast in each of the 12 dorms that I would weigh out an ounce or somewhere thereabouts and give it to them and then just let them sell it. And then they'd come back to me, pay me for that one. I'd give them more. Right. So
and like you said, I mean, I think that's very normal on college campuses. And you also said earlier, like when you're interacting with people on college campuses who are selling drugs, they're only selling, typically, a lot of them are just selling marijuana, which would be rare off of a college campus. You're typically going to interact with drug dealers who would offer, different things other than marijuana. But it is, for whatever reason, on college campuses, I think it has something to do with people become insulated in that bubble, that college bubble. And like you said, there's, you don't have these really negative impacts of smoking weed. You don't see people, passing out or getting sick or things like that. So naturally, you would, just human nature takes over. Well, this isn't a harmful thing. So is there anything wrong with smoking it? And you sort of forget your surroundings. You sort of forget where you are and you forget it's illegal. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, so that's definitely what happened. I mean, I did not take the precautions I probably should have if I wanted to continue that as a profession for any amount of time. And especially having, potentially 12 people who could get caught and trace the sale back to me. So that's what happened. About 4 of those people, and one in particular, got caught. Sorry about that. Four of those people, one in particular, got caught, and they all rolled on me and they ratted me out. And one of them really ratted me out. Right. So, it was right around finals when I got my first arrest that resulted in a conviction, and finals of my sophomore year. So, just had spent all day studying. I think it was an all-nighter from the night before, so I was exhausted into the night. And a couple days before, one of these guys had said, "Hey, a friend of mine got arrested, and they said that the cops said they're looking for someone of your description with your car because they know where this weed is coming from, right?" And he's like, so he told me that a couple days before to prep me. Then he called me up again and saying, "Hey, these cops are hot on you. I just heard somebody else confirm the story." And he's like, but, I know you said you just picked up and you have like 2 pounds, but I know somebody who will take all of that off your hands right now. Right. So I thought about it. And I was like, you know what, if I can get out of all of this, sure, let's do it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I forget how much exactly it was, but I decided not to take it all over there with me. I only decided to take a 1/4 pound, and that was probably pretty smart. So,
and forgive me for a minute, but so did you say that you considered this person to be a good friend of yours? Or?
No, not so much a friend of a friend. Okay. At the time, though, I'm a pretty outgoing guy and naturally very trusting. Like I said before, I did not take the proper precautions to make this a line of work that I would have succeeded in long term. So everyone's my friend, especially at that point in my life, right? So had never really been betrayed to this level before. Right. So when I showed up there, got pulled over on my way by a K-9 unit, if you can imagine that, and they happened to find a 1/4 pound of marijuana broken up into a bunch of different bags in the trunk, right? So. Especially me at the time, because I went to a good school system and was part of like Model United Nations and really knew the law, I probably shouldn't have rolled on myself as quickly as I did, but they had me dead to rights. And I did it. I completely told them everything I was doing, and they played the good cop, bad cop routine. They got everything out of me they wanted to get out of me. And it's actually, I'm almost as equally as embarrassed about that as I am about, having been arrested in the first place, right? It was not making it harder for them, but they had that case completely. They had every detail about every drug I sold on UConn, or every person I had working for me on UConn campus. And,
I think it's a lot easier in hindsight looking back on something like that. In the heat of the moment, I mean, you like to think that you're going to be on your toes and know the law and not let them search the vehicle and all these different things and not give anything up. But it's not easy to do in the heat of the moment, I'm sure.
No, definitely not. So, and yeah, I was scared shitless.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely scared. So, yeah, so they booked me, took me to jail that night. Next day I ended up getting bailed out. And, so I spent, one night in jail. Next day I got bailed out, and then the court process began. It actually took them 2 years for us to get to a conviction after that. Because I was trying to get the felony off my record for a long time. And the prosecutor was a pretty hard ass, especially with Yukon in his jurisdiction. He was under a lot of pressure to make sure that people who sold marijuana or any other drugs on
Mm-hmm.
Yukon really took, they got the maximum treatment of the law. So he was pushing for a felony with jail time for a long time. And I ended up pleading to I had a great lawyer, spent about $8,000 on that lawyer throughout the course of those 2 years, and ended up pleading to just a misdemeanor possession, even though they had caught me with more than that and had all the details. But there was a 90-day sentence attached to it, and I served 30 of those 90 days before they let me out on good behavior. So, or whatever other thing they used to measure whether I should have been in there. So I think back on that a lot now, though, and especially listening to your program. Some of the other stories I've heard, those people who couldn't afford lawyers easily could have been faced with 7 to 10 years in jail for what I did, right? So the fact that I had that $8,000 made all the difference in my case. And yeah, I could afford to, one, get bailed out,
Right.
and two, I could afford to fight for 2 years, being out, and actually continuing to pursue my education at another college during
Right.
that whole time, right? So, that made a big difference for me. And looking back, I'm very lucky to have that opportunity. And a lot of my advocacy now, I really don't want anyone to go through that experience who I'm lucky that I had the resources to fight my way out of it, but I really don't want anyone who doesn't have the resources for that fight to have it impact them, because I certainly wouldn't have been able to be here today if I didn't have bail money and money for a lawyer at that time. I wouldn't have made it this far. So that's a lot of my motivation. I got a lot of motivations, but that's certainly high on the list.
So that the 30 days that you did serve, what was that like for you? I mean, is that something that, was it as you expected, or was it, did things surprise you about how things were run, or what was it like?
It was surreal. So for at least the first couple of days, I never thought that, I still kind of don't remember necessarily, but it didn't feel real to me. Right. So, I got booked, I went, and then everything slows down. That's all I can say, is that everything when you're in jail, and I wasn't even in for long, but it slows down. And jail is disgusting. It's at least the one I was at, it was really dirty, and the food was not good. There was a lot of harassment of the prisoners. It seemed like everything was factionalized, and they kept people at each other's throats so that they didn't have, and I say they, but the correctional officers didn't have to do all of the policing, and they kind of left it up to different factions within the jail that would police each other, right? I was in a dorm, which is a little different than being, in a cell with one other person. I was in a dorm with four people per room, and then no gate on the front, so you could move around pretty freely. It was really, really loud. I remember nobody slept, and then they'd wake you up at 4 a.m. anyway. So it was, there was a lot of things that I found really, really surprising. And obviously, who would have thought that, a white kid from Northeast Connecticut, from the woods, from a high school called Woodstock Academy, who would have thought that person wouldn't fit in with a lot of the other demographics that were in there, right? So I also was definitely in there. Everybody knew that I was fresh meat. That's, I heard that saying multiple times. And luckily, I had just come off of playing basketball for 3 years, and I was still pretty good because, having shown my prowess on the court, I still believe to this day that earned me a couple of key friends there. For only 30 days, but whatever. They remember seeing me play basketball and saw that I was pretty good. And had I not been, then maybe I wouldn't have caught those people's eyes. And they took care of me, and they made sure nothing bad happened, if there was anything bad to happen. But the whole experience is horrible. And, it's crushing when you're in there. You can't, like I said, time slows down. Your entire future is in question. You're at the mercy of bureaucracy, which I didn't realize how painful that is, or how frustrating that can be. But it would have been so much worse all I can say is it would have been so much worse if I hadn't been able to make bail. And I could only imagine. I was sitting in there with somebody who went to court, and he thought he was finally going to get his court date, and he got continued again. And he had been continued like 3 or 4 times in a row before that. So I can only imagine how much more frustrating it was for everybody else in there other than me. But gave me a perspective on life that I didn't have before. So for that, I'm grateful. I'm just glad I didn't have to spend more than 30 days in there. So,
So you talked a little bit about your activism. One of the things you're trying to do is make sure that, other people, don't end up with the other people who can't afford maybe the $8,000 to hire a lawyer or to make bail, aren't subjected to that. So what types of things are you doing with your activism in order to set those wheels in motion in Connecticut?
Yeah, so I didn't really start until about 2 years ago. The reason for that is during this whole time, I graduated from college, got a degree in economics, ended up working for an aerospace manufacturing company that makes parts for airplanes. And then from there, ended up working for a company that makes military aerospace parts. So the owner of that company knew about my history and was able to get me in without ever doing a background check or some of the other things that would have been required to work at a company that makes military parts like that. But I had to shut up. I couldn't let anybody know where I was coming from, right?
Oh, really?
Or anything that had happened to me. So I had gotten that job, worked there for about 3 years. And then I got arrested again because I'm an idiot. So it was right after Colorado. It was right after Colorado had legalized, and I had a friend in Colorado, and that person would mail me weed from Colorado, their brand new legal weed that they had just got. And I got caught up with that. And I still not 100% sure how this happened, but I think a dog or somebody must have smelled the package, and I got arrested receiving the package one time.
At the post office, or?
Well, it was at my apartment, and you had to like go pick up the package from the lady at the apartment office, and I did, and there was a cop waiting there, and the rest is history, right? But so that time they ended up giving me a felony, and that was a whole nother experience. One, because I'm working at a company that doesn't know I had these things in my past, and I had just messed up again. 2, because I was already kind of living a double life. And once again, I'm trying to keep these things as secret as I can in my life. And that's just really, really stressful place to be.
Yeah.
And I'm going through this whole court proceedings again. And that particular district didn't really care too much about sending me to jail, but they were going to make sure I got a felony. And they were going really, really hard after my car, even though I had no, there's no way that car could have been purchased with drug money because I wasn't selling drugs at the time. I just received it. They still gave me the intent to distribute because I had mentioned at one point in the interview that I had shared with friends, sometimes with that weed that I had received from them. And then they said, okay, so when you do that, how does that relate to this car and whatever? They asked me so many questions about that freaking car. But yeah, they really just wanted to impound the car. I'm looking back on it. I think that was a lot of their impetus. They wanted to get something out of the deal. They also took a bunch of stuff from my apartment because they raided my apartment right after that I never got back either. So,
anything of value?
Yeah. So I think it was not like super value, but there was electronics that were gone. It's probably like, I think a PlayStation 4, I remember specifically. So, PlayStation 3. I'm always wondering if like the cop was just like, oh, hey, it was around Christmas. Like, hey, I need to get something from a kid, right? And just grabbed it from my apartment.
That happens.
So
I mean, seriously.
Yeah, but so I ended up keeping that job, and once again hired a lawyer. I think it was $4,000 that time. That prosecutor just did not want to send me to jail. He didn't care. So in the 7 years between the 2 arrests, I already noticed a big change in the judicial system's policy towards, or at least Connecticut, their policy towards marijuana.
Well, different areas, right? You were on a college campus, which probably different optics with the prosecutor there has got to show that he's keeping these college students in line. And then, what were you in a city or more, a more urban area for the second one, or?
Yeah, I was pretty close to Hartford. I was in Manchester, Connecticut. So it was definitely more urban, and they had bigger problems to deal with. You're right. So, but it was a different experience, and they wanted to push me through the system quickly and get me the help that I needed. Right. So their big concern was getting me into a drug program. Let me tell you, going through a drug program with people who have real addiction problems, when you got caught just smoking weed. I did not consider myself addicted to drugs, and I once again had to pretend to be something I'm not, which was addicted to drugs to get through that program. So that's how I felt about it the whole time, right?
That's got to be a strange experience for sure.
Yeah, and everybody kind of looks at you. They know you're not taking it seriously, or they're judging you for being there in the first place. So for a drug that you shouldn't really have those types of problems.
It's like that.
Not to say,
have you ever seen the movie? Is it Half Baked with Dave Chappelle?
Yeah, yep, love it.
It's Bob. I won't say the quote. Yeah, with Bob Saget.
Oh yes, exactly. Yeah. No, nobody is getting. Yeah, exactly. Nobody's ruining their lives. Usually, unless you eat too much food and sleep through your final or something. That's the extent that that using marijuana is gonna ruin your life. It might affect your motivation, but then you probably have some other deeper issues you got to deal with anyways. Right. So. So sorry, that's from there. I kept that job through the second arrest, avoided jail time. And then that time I knew I needed to clean my life up. My wife had just come into my life. She was my girlfriend at the time, but she really was there for me, and I love her for it. And we focused on building a life together. And that was really good for me. I was on probation for 5 years. Ended up getting released after 2.5. So completed all the probation requirements and never violated or I was completely clean. I wasn't using for those entire 5 years or for those 2.5 years. And I continued to not use for some time after that. So and then, about 2 years ago, I saw that this movement to legalize in Connecticut was gaining steam, and I saw attached to that was the potential expungement of every marijuana crime from people's record, including felony intent to distribute. And I thought, I really need to get involved in this. This is something obviously would benefit me, but then again, I wasn't in a very bad place. I was employed, and I had managed to make something of myself. But I knew that there were so many other people out there in Connecticut and around the country that just did not have the same opportunities and was not as lucky as me. And that felony or any other arrest that they had on their record, it was keeping them from employment, most importantly from employment, but also from some state programs if they needed it, and then also from having a place to live, keeping people from their Second Amendment rights, which is something that didn't matter to me at all. But it's starting to, because I'd like to get a pistol, and I don't think it's going to happen anymore. So, so
the right to defend your life and your family. I mean, it's crazy that they take that away from you. Yeah.
So a lot of really negative implications having a felony on your record, and I just saw that since that element was being discussed by advocates who obviously had the governor's ear, the newly elected governor's ear, and the legislature's ear, that, they really needed to hear my story too. So I just started getting out there. And while I had been completely shoving my story deep down inside, not telling anybody because I didn't want it to impact my career negatively, I'm going to call that part of being stigmatized by the whole process. Instead, I realized I need to let this out. I need to tell everybody what's going on, including people at work, including, and slowly but surely have my story get out there to the people in the people who are making decisions, in the hopes that it would influence them when they get to vote yes or no on this future legislation. And that's pretty much what I've been doing since the beginning of 2018 is kind of been doing it on my own, because there are a couple groups here in Connecticut that have been working since 2008 or earlier to legalize. I don't want to step on anybody's toes and try to steal their thunder, since I feel like we're getting towards the end of this. Please, 2020 might be our year, hopefully. But at the same time, I did want to make sure that I got out there and told my story. So you guys heard most of it. And since that time, actually, right before Thanksgiving, I've really been inspired by this whole process and by talking to legislators. And I actually ended up leaving that job on very good terms. But I'm spending and I've been saving up some money. So I've spending the next 5 months, which is the entire length of legislative session here in Connecticut. I took time off, and I'm going to be up there lobbying full time to do this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm really hoping that I can get this through, that we can, the group of people who's worked really hard to get this message in front of legislators, get this through this session, because I do believe it's really, really important. And waiting it looks like we don't get it through this year. It's going to be a 2 to 4 year wait until the legislature flips hands again, and there's another chance. So
just taking a real quick ad break here. One of our Lions of Liberty Pride members, Tyler Colford, he reached out to me, and he recently upgraded to our $100 level where he gets an ad. And he decided to use this ad today because he has a special message for you out there. He wanted me to let you all know that he's into long walks through the woods. He's into comic books, Graham Hancock novels, video games, and Austrian economics. And if you're into some of those same things, then check out his rap group, Jinx Inc. It's available on all streaming platforms. I was just listening to his song Bootstraps on Spotify. So check out Bootstraps. Check out Jinx Inc. That's JYNXINC. JYNXINC. Jinx Inc. Check it out.
We independent, you knew that. No government kickbacks, don't let sacks, just a mattress stuffed with a few stacks.
So I know states have gone about it different ways. Just to be clear, that in Connecticut it would be legislative. A legislative bill, and then the governor would sign it. It wouldn't be, voted on as a ballot initiative or anything like that.
We don't have a referendum process in Connecticut. So the only way to do that in Connecticut would be to do a constitutional amendment, which is a 2-year process, which means it would be voted on in 2022, maybe legalized in 2023, probably 2024. So that's the backup plan if this doesn't work out this session. That seems like what some people are pushing for.
What's the makeup of the state legislature in Connecticut? Is it a mix of Republicans and Democrats? Is it skewed way, much more one way than the other? I have no idea.
We've been blue for 40 years. We've had a couple. We've had the governor flip hands. A couple of there's been a couple of Republican governors in there, but it's been largely Democrat for the last 40 years. Completely Democrat for the last 40 years, and they've controlled the legislature for the last 40 years, and they have, if not a supermajority, a very close to a supermajority right now in the Senate and Representatives or House of Representatives. However, I tend to find that the people who are calling themselves Democrats in Connecticut nowadays, they're very moderate Democrats. There is a group of progressives who are actually pushing for this social justice, and really they're the ones who are pushing for this legalization process. But the moderate Democrats are the ones that I'm putting most of my effort into telling my story, so that they have my story, because they're the ones who aren't sold on this yet. I think a lot of these people would be Republicans in other states, but because of the history of our state and for the politically expedient party, at least around here, is you got to be Democrat, or you're usually not getting any traction unless.
It's interesting how that works. If you compare maybe a Democrat in Connecticut to a Democrat in, I don't know, California, I'm sure they might be very different.
Oh yeah, if you were to take your average Democrat in Connecticut, they're not even close to California, unless they're from that progressive party wing, which is about, I think, a third of the Democratic Party is from the Progressive Party, and they align more to that West Coast blue politics there. So don't spend a whole lot of time working on them. I really spend a lot of time on the Republicans, though. So also, I've been a Republican almost my whole life, and this whole process drove me to actually leave the Republican Party, and I registered in December to be a libertarian. So
awesome.
They are definitely the opposition party in Connecticut, so that comes with a whole separate bunch of rules. but I've really been trying to bring there's some libertarian-minded Republicans that should vote in favor of legalizing marijuana, and I've been working on trying to give them the confidence to do so if the time comes around. But what I'm starting to realize now is that if the Democrats can't do this unilaterally in Connecticut, they're not going to do it at all. So I really need to work on members of their party, and that's what I'm going to be doing tomorrow when our legislative session opens on this Wednesday, September 5th. Or February 5th, sorry. So.
Very cool. So has there been any polling in Connecticut on how the public feels about legalized recreational marijuana or anything?
Oh, yeah. 68% are in favor of it. It's very, very popular, as it is around the country. 60% of people in the country believe that it should be legalized, taxed and regulated in some way. And I'm just talking about recreational, not medical. Much higher percentages believe that medical cannabis should be available. So, but yeah, obviously, most states and particularly Connecticut, our policies just have not aligned on a lot of things with what the public wants. And this is certainly one of those things. I have my theories as to why, and I think a lot of it has to do with some of the lobbying money that's coming into our state and also into the federal government too.
What's the reason that people, either Republicans or Democrats, what reasons do they give you for not supporting this?
So for the last 2 years, I've probably had about well over 2,000 conversations with people, like legislators and then normal people too, just like you and me. And everyone, whether they support it or not, their biggest concern is being able to enforce driving. So they don't want people to get high and drive. And because you don't have the ability to like mouth swab or blood test or breathalyze or whatever to, authoritatively crack down on that person in the act of driving right that moment, they are conditioned, I'm going to say, by the current way of using a breathalyzer to enforce alcohol, drunk driving. They really want to see the same thing for marijuana. A couple, valid concerns to a certain extent. However, I don't believe that it should infringe on our liberties. In the end, it's everybody's decision and responsibility to drive safely and to not drive impaired. And there's a lot of things you can't test for out there. You can't test for opioids. You can't test for being tired. You, for the most part, can't test for looking at your phone. And all these things.
For eating a sandwich when you're driving.
Yeah, exactly. And while they have distracted driving laws, right? They don't have anything that prevents you from. They don't take antihistamines off the shelf. They don't completely stop giving people their medicines that can interfere with machinery. And there's a number of things in CVS right now if you go that'll say don't drive or don't operate machinery. So it hasn't denied them from, or hasn't caused the government to deny us our liberties to consume those things. It's just the fact that marijuana was made illegal 80 years ago that it's just easier for them to leave it illegal, to keep it illegal, than it is for them to actually legalize it and come up with a new method of enforcement. And what I would say is, unfortunately, you're just going to have your cops be trained in a different method of analyzing it, right?
Yeah.
And if it means detaining people so they're not a danger to themselves, but you don't get that magic arrest, then so be it. That's what I would say. If you're really worried, the cops have the ability to detain somebody for an amount of time so they're not a threat to themselves, have them do that. But that's significantly more work than booking somebody, and they don't get the arrest at the end of the day, which...
Yeah. And I mean, I've heard the exact same thing from people on the driving. It's the first thing you hear. And it is interesting, but it's interesting that people don't, I mean, obviously marijuana has been illegal for, decades and decades. People are still smoking it. People are still driving. Why are they worried about that now? I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense. I have heard that it might have been, might be the University of Pittsburgh, which is where I live. I think I heard they developed, and I don't know like what sort of stage it's in, but developed some sort of way to test with a breathalyzer. Not that I would support that, but I've heard there's at least some prototypes out there for that. Which
there's a lot of research going into it, and the most viable one is a mouth swab, which will give you false positives for all sorts of things. And that breathalyzer, I think it was University of Pittsburgh, coffee, other things will set it off too. So
really?
Yeah, so they're getting there. But even then, I'd say, how's that going to? Anyway, everybody's built differently, and having a different THC, the active intoxicant in marijuana, everybody's going to react differently to different levels of THC in their blood. So, it just doesn't seem like a one size fits all solution.
Different strains, are going to affect people in different ways. Yeah, it's even less one size fits all than alcohol, and alcohol should not be one size fits all. It's my opinion. It's ridiculous that you have this, standard line that everyone's going to react the same, and their ability to drive is going to drop the same standard amount based on this arbitrary percentage of alcohol in your blood.
But so I guess the only statistic I have to counter this when I'm discussing it with those people is that there's been a little bit of, there's been 8 years of research since Colorado legalized, 8 years of statistics. And it looks like fatalities and crashes have actually gone down very, very slightly. That's probably within the margin of error of that amount of time in those surveys, but it hasn't got worse. So, that's really the only thing that I can say is that, is point them to Colorado as a whole to say that, this problem has not gotten worse since they've legalized it. There has not been a high profile, somebody's high and crashes and kills 15 people anywhere that I've heard. And I keep looking for it. And there just hasn't been a high profile marijuana case that involving a car. So.
And there will be more and more data as, since so many more states are legalizing recreationally. So as that data comes in and more data comes in, hopefully that does help to persuade, since I guess people need that today.
Very quickly, the number 2 reason, and this is a really close number 2, is that everybody seems to know somebody who never got out of their mom's basement, right? Who's just been smoking weed their whole life and is not very motivated to do very much with their life.
A couple people like that.
And they seem to blame it on the marijuana, but I don't think it's the marijuana. I think that they would probably be doing that, whether they imbibed with marijuana or anything else. Anyway, they'd probably be there might be some depression there. There might be some other challenges that those people have in their lives. But as with all drugs, if there's something going on with somebody, it's not the drug's fault. It's the person's got something that they got to deal with usually, and something they got to work through. I certainly have had it many times. So, and with marijuana, I got that first year at UConn that I was selling and smoking more than I ever have in my entire life. I went from a 3.8 GPA down to a 2 GPA, right? And I just barely made it through that first year at UConn. So. Anyway, I obviously had some things I needed to work through, and I'm glad that I was able to do that. So
right, yeah. I mean, marijuana can be abused. I don't think anybody is arguing that it can't be.
Yep.
But that's not a reason to make it illegal. Not a reason to have a huge prohibition, federal prohibition. But Nick, before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to let people know where they can maybe learn how to help your activism. I don't know if you have a website or what the best way is. If anybody, maybe some listeners up in Connecticut want to get involved, what can they do?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I'd love if you guys would look me up on Facebook. I'm only on Facebook right now, but I have an advocacy page there. It's Nicholas Stein, marijuana activist, legal marijuana advocate, not activist. I just changed that. So look me up. If you look up Nicholas Stein, it should be one of the only pages there, right? And I put a lot of information on that. I use that as my forum to share all the best information I have about legalize, all the best reasons to legalize. I focused a lot on personal liberties. I actually just authored this letter that I'm going to send to the governor, and I have a petition of over 700 physical signatures that people have signed attached to this letter. And it's got 4 main reasons. And my main one is personal liberties, which has to do with people not getting experiencing those consequences of going to jail in the criminal justice system for just getting, just using marijuana occasionally. Right. It just doesn't make sense. But there's a lot of really good consumer safety reasons too, right? So the product that you're getting on the black market is not nearly as safe as what you can get from a dispensary. They're using pesticides, fertilizers, molds, anti-mold things, a lot of them when they're burned, it'll turn into arsenic or other really bad things that you will end up ingesting when you're using black market marijuana. So we just saw this whole vape crisis. I'm not sure if you've followed that, right? But the CDC officially, 60 deaths and countless injuries. I think it's over 450 injuries in their lungs that is associated with bad vape products. And these are THC vape cartridges that were only available on the black market. The CDC has targeted those, and has identified that those were the cause of this crisis. And because of that, they outlawed tobacco vape products, which have nothing to do with anything. And it's much, much harder, like in neighboring Massachusetts where marijuana is legal. You couldn't get vape products there for a really long time either. That drove people. And
they raised the smoking age to 21. That was part of the response too. Just insanity.
And it made no sense, right? So they'll just grab. It seems like there's there's some. I got a lot of conspiracy theories, but what this act did in actuality is it drove people back to the black market. If they had been getting a safe, clean source from a dispensary, then not being able to get it for a certain amount of time, they went back to the black market right in the middle of the vape crisis when all of these vape cartridges were out there with the chemicals, glycol and vitamin E acetate that were getting people sick. So it's just the product is tested for safety. That's one of my main reasons. And then also, you're not having kids or anyone else for that matter going to the black market just for weed, where unless you're coming to see me on UConn campus, you were probably also getting offered cocaine, maybe things like crack or opioids, also much more addictive, destructive drugs. And just the act of exposing yourself to the black market, and you can start getting involved in organized crime and things like that. So that's one of my major reasons is I don't ever want to have to go to a drug dealer again. I don't want anyone. I have a 2-year-old daughter, right? I don't, she's going to make decisions she's going to make. And I don't want her ever to have to put herself in a lot of the really sketchy situations that I put myself in if she decides to use marijuana later in life. Honey, if you're listening to this, we'll talk about that later. So, and then another thing is Northeast Connecticut is a really, where we got left behind by the rest of the state during development and industry, right? So we used to have a lot of manufacturing. All those jobs left 30, 40 years ago, and it hasn't backfilled, right? So my particular area of the state is pretty economically depressed compared to the rest of the state. And we have some pockets of really cool stuff going on, but I just see the legal marijuana industry as a potential boon for Northeast Connecticut. And I'm doing everything I can to try to actually attract the industry to come invest in Northeast Connecticut. And if I could be involved in that after this advocacy, I think I will. I'm really passionate about trying to bring the legal marijuana industry here because there's a lot of good it's doing. $13 billion in legal sales this year in the United States. That's one of the fastest growing industries possible. And any state that, wants to develop its economy should really take a look at what the legal marijuana industry can do. And because it's federally illegal, Connecticut's entire demand for legal marijuana, if it's legalized this year, will have to be met by companies cultivating it and manufacturing it right here in Connecticut. So that's a homegrown industry that, can really help a lot of people. I see them every day who got left behind by the manufacturing industry and haven't found that next opportunity. And marijuana is growing marijuana nowadays is much more manufacturing than it is agriculture. So I'm hoping that I can use it to make a positive impact in my community economically and make some people's lives better. And then there's the tax revenue piece of it. And Connecticut is broke as shit. We've mismanaged our money for so long. And now there's a lot of pressure to get caught up on that, right? So honestly, if Connecticut did not need the tax revenue, the Democrats would not be pushing for this right now. This is, in a lot of ways, a really blatant cash grab for tax revenue. So now I'm also dealing with people on the other side, people who support legalization, who are like, I can't get behind this bill because there's too many taxes attached to it. And they're still discussing what that is, but it looks like it's going to be a 20 to 30% tax, right? And that will keep the black market alive and well, which is probably true. But I still see it as incremental improvement the expungement piece is what is key. And I'm hoping that I can reach out to those people and let them know, like, listen, even if there's a tax attached to it, just getting this expungement clause is going to change people's lives. It's going to make them, it's really going to make an impact on people who have been arrested for this before, who could potentially be looking for work or apartments or any of those things, and get the stigma off those people. And that's I think some of the biggest changes we can make, and that's what I'm hoping to do, and that's what I'm working with some really good other people, and I'm working with the Windham County Libertarians to do. So,
awesome.
So
that's great stuff, and I love that you are, communicating your message in a way that this is a public safety issue. It's also a jobs issue. This is going to stimulate the economy. These are things that are clear as day when people start to actually look at the facts and figures here. The tax issue, of course, you're not going to be surprised. I have the same concerns, and seeing these legal bills to legalize recreationally in other states. I know the Pennsylvania Democrats put one forward recently, where of course it had the huge tax, but not only that, it's of course very cronyized, where there's only certain licenses that they're giving out, and they're only going to give them to 4 or 5 different corporations that can come in. But those are concerns, and I definitely do agree with you that it's better than the alternative to a point. I don't know. I don't know what that line is. I know Ohio had a bill a couple of years ago that was just complete garbage, because it was like one company was going to control all of the growing, all of the distribution, which is just ridiculous. But I understand it's a balancing act, and I understand that I agree with you. The most important thing is the expungements and getting those people, getting that stigma off of them, and moving the ball forward there. But I definitely give you kudos for doing this, for being an advocate.
Thank you, John. And just a quick note on that, the way it looks like it might happen, most likely will happen in Connecticut, is with equity in mind. That means that, they're going to at least carve off some portion of the legal marijuana industry to go to groups of people and communities that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, right? So It's been a really strong push to do that throughout the entire legalization process. So I'm really hopeful and encouraged that this isn't going to be a whole completely corporate enterprise. So, and then also hopefully will be regulated in a way that provides consumer access to everybody who wants it, so that they're not faced with any of these other tough decisions I've been talking about. And I guess if I had a pipe dream beyond my hope of hopes, it's that this advocacy would somehow get me in front of our governor, Ned Lamont, so I could make a pitch to him, my elevator pitch. I want to be on your cannabis commission and I want to be someone, involved in trying to get these who are approving these licenses. One, because I've seen it from a criminal justice point of view. So I've lived that end of things. I have an economics major. I've worked in big corporations. I see how it works from that side of things. But also I'm from Northeast Connecticut, where I think a small business approach would really, really work well for that community too. So, I really want to, my main focus is consumer advocacy and criminal justice advocacy. And if I could take that perspective and somehow use it to implement the policy later in life, whether that's on the Cannabis Commission or somewhere else, that's what I'm angling to do here, and everything is just practice for that. That's what I'm kind of the way that I'm looking at this. And if I get through it and either the bill passes or it hasn't, and I haven't done that, well, I can always go back to aerospace, and I'd be very, very happy to do that too. But at least I will have told my story. I'm really passionate about this, obviously, and I won't be living that double life anymore, which was crushing me forever. So. Thank you very much for hearing my story. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, Nick. And I encourage our audience to reach out and help Nick in any way that you can. And just keep up the great work. And I'm sure we'll maybe get an update here in a couple months from you.
Sounds good. Session ends in April. So reach out to me in April. I'll let you know how it went. All right.
Okay. Sounds good. See you, Nick.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to today's show. Another great episode of Felony Friday. As you know, Felony Friday is one of 3 shows we have here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Of course, we kick off every single week with our Monday show hosted by Mark Claire. It's our longest running program, our flagship program, where Mark interviews leaders in the liberty movement. Every Wednesday, we have Electric Liberty Land hosted by Brian McWilliams. It's your weekly shot of culture, comedy, liberty, swearing, and just good fun. Check that out. You can get all 3 shows by subscribing for the great price of $0 per month. You get everything that we have here. So please check everything out. And if you like it all, please consider supporting what we're doing here at Lions of Liberty. A great way to do that is by joining the Lions of Liberty Pride. You can do that by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. Another great way of doing that is by following, liking, sharing our stuff on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lions of Liberty. On Instagram and Twitter, we are at Lions of Liberty. And the discussion forum where all the greatest and brightest minds go to talk about politics, liberty, everything that's happening in the world today, current events, the Lions of Liberty Forum on Facebook, which you can find by typing Lions of Liberty Forum in the search bar at the top of Facebook, clicking search, comes up, say you want to join it, answer a question, bam, you're in, and the rest is just going to be a great journey for you. So check that out. That's all I have for today. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.